Good afternoon, everyone on our listening and viewing audience. It's Tracy's Keeping It Real show, and today we're still talking about home ownership and learning more about the opportunities that are out there for the new home buyers and the ones that are living in homes, and we're wanting to make sure we can keep them in them. So this afternoon, I have with me LaShelle Smith. She's a homeownership advisor for Powderhorn Resident Group. And we also have in our studio this afternoon Henry Rucker. He's the Associate Director of Homeownership and Financial Coaching Project for Pride in Living. So let's welcome both of you to the show this afternoon.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you for having us.
Thank you. Love to have you. Love to talk more about this. We've had the opportunity to have some other uh, colleagues of yours here in the studio
Hmm.
talking about home ownership and really trying to drive home, how people can get assistance. That's a big thing in our community is
Yes.
we want to own homes. It's not necessarily things that have been necessarily passed down to us as purchase homes that have already been bought, purchased, paid for. So we're trying to learn how to build the generational gap of our homeowners now, teaching their kids how to become homeowners, but also getting them into homes in the beginning so that they can teach the value in home ownership.
Yes.
So, LaShelle, I want to start off with you with the questions this afternoon. So,
Okay.
let's talk about your role as far as being a homeownership advisor and what are some of the first steps you take when working with a potential home buyer who is just beginning their journey but feels overwhelmed by the process because buying a home is a big deal. It's one of your
It
biggest
is.
purchases, right?
Yes.
So it's not going to be an easy one, two, three, and it's probably good that it's not because you
Hmm.
need to make a conscious decision on what you're
Yes.
doing.
Yes.
But talk about what is that? What is that role? What does that look like?
Yeah. What we do is we take a look at the client's income and where they're at. Okay. We ask questions like how long you've been on your job. Okay. That's one of the requirements is that you have 2 years of uninterrupted income. Okay. We talk about that. What does that look like as far as the dollar amount? Okay. We look at their household size. We take a look at their credit. We do pull a credit report. We pull a credit report that the banks use. So we're pulling from all three credit bureaus, and we discuss what challenges that we may see on the credit report. We talk about what the minimum scores are for the different mortgage loan products, such as conventional mortgage and an FHA mortgage. We talk about that. We talk about what things that they can anticipate through the process. We also do a deep dive into the budget. So, of course, when you get approved for a mortgage, you're going to be approved based on your gross income. Okay. That's a number that we only see on the paycheck.
Hmm.
That's not what's deposited into the bank.
Right, which we look at.
Yes, that's what we
Yeah,
look
yeah,
at. That's
yeah.
what we live on.
Right.
So we use that number and we create a budget. We go through the steps of how to create a budget. And what I'm looking for as a counselor is how much you have left over after your gas is paid, after your electric is paid, after you've paid your rent, what you spend on clothing, things of that nature. Because after all of those bills are paid, you need to have a positive cash flow. Why? Because when you become a homeowner, there is no landlord for you to call on to fix something. You have to be in a place of solvency where you can take care of that matter that needs to be fixed.
Right. So with that said, then why then does your gross income is what we're looking at because net is what we're working with.
Yeah.
So how does that correlate with what I actually have to spend? If I'm looking at a paycheck that's let's just say $5,000, well,
Hmm.
probably won't be looking at that paycheck, but let's just say if I'm looking
Hmm.
at a paycheck that's $1,000,
Hmm.
but we're really working on what I'm bringing home, which is 700. How does that compare then if we're looking at what we can afford?
Yeah. We will use what's called a qualifying worksheet based on the gross because the banks use the gross, right? And we take that gross number and we place it into our qualifying worksheet, and that's going to show us the loan amount. It's also going to show us what that principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, which is the mortgage payment, that's going to show us what that number is. The government has determined that 31% of your gross income is an affordable mortgage payment. So we look at what that number is against what you actually bring home.
Okay.
Because once you're paying that mortgage payment at the first of the month or before the 15th, okay, it's the rest of the life that's living that you have to be accounted for too as well.
Right.
How are you going to pay for gas and electric, and baby needs a new pair of shoes and things of that nature. So we need to be able to factor life into the budget. That's why it's so important to budget. I've been budgeting since I became a homeowner for the first time when I was 27 years old. I'm now in my 50s. I still budget.
Well,
I still do it.
and I think a lot of people do. They just don't realize it when they're
Yes.
budgeting to figure out what they can do to go buy a new pair of shoes.
Yes.
Or budgeting to figure out how they're gonna get their hair did.
Yes.
They budgeting. They just maybe not
No,
overall
yeah.
and not in
Put it
their.
on paper
Or,
or
yeah.
on a
Right.
app or
Right.
anything. It's up here
Yeah.
sometimes.
It's
But
some.
it's
Yeah.
actually good to actually see what's coming in and what's going out. So
It's very important.
yeah.
So Henry, we understanding the barriers that people have. You work closely with individuals facing systemic barriers to home ownership, and we talk about credit report just a minute ago with LaShelle. So that credit report comes out of a system that then gets used against you or for you. So what is the most common challenges that low to moderate income families face when it comes to buying a home where that plays a factor?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with what LaShelle was saying in the beginning. Is I ask everybody that's watching and will watch in the future, when was the last time they actually sat down and did a budget? Right? It can be online, it could be on a piece of paper, it could be on anywhere, it could be on a whiteboard at work if you want to take a picture of it, then take it home. And I think what happens to a lot of people, we don't understand how the system works, right?
Yes.
So I always tell people, you can't play the game if you don't know the rules of the game. And I think one thing we miss, especially in the African American community, is understanding the rules.
Yes.
One of the rules is knowing where your money is going. And I think LaShelle hit something too, is like the bank uses your gross income. You pay your bills on your net, right? How you pay your bills affect your credit score, right? So you have TransUnion, you have Equifax, you have Experian. Those are the big three. Recommend everybody understand how that really works. So again, I'm going to repeat it. So you got TransUnion, you got Equifax, and you got Experian. Those are the systems that the bank will use to qualify you for a car loan, a credit card, and for a mortgage. So anything that you're going to do in life, if you're asking a bank to borrow you money, they're going to go to the credit reporting system. Now you go into the barbershop, the beauty salon, and you ask to borrow some money. That's based on your word, right? The banks don't care about your word.
No.
They want to know what your score is. So it's important that we understand that, and we understand, even going back to the gross part, I'm okay if people have a little bit of lower net if you're putting some of that money into your 401k or your 403b, right? You're putting money into retirement to learn the rule of 72. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think the thing that we haven't learned is credit is what's running the society when it comes to borrowing money. And I tell people it's expensive to have bad credit.
Yes,
So that means I can go get a car loan with a 580 credit score, but I'm paying at a higher interest rate. If I have a 680 or 700 plus credit score, then I have more options of
Yes.
what I can get as a product. Same thing with the mortgage world. If I borrowed money from you and I didn't pay you back, and you having to run into LaShelle and say, "Hey, LaShelle, Henry reached out to me, he borrowed some money for me, and he don't pay that would hesitate her from want to borrow me money." That's what the credit reporting system is doing. It's telling other people should they borrow you money or if they should not borrow you money. If they do borrow you money, I'm going to normally charge you a higher interest rate because you're a greater risk. So I got to make sure I get my money back. And if I get my money back, I want to be rewarded for risking that money that I gave to you. So I do think what we want to talk about, I ask people this all the time. If you have 4 good friends or 5 or 2, do you know their credit scores? Right? Most people don't know their best friend's credit scores. They also don't know their gross income. Because those are things we don't talk about in the Black community.
Right.
But if I told you guys right now today I could show you how to make $20,000 and I didn't tell you, you'd be mad at me.
Right.
Right? But why we don't have that same approach when it comes to credit? Right? We do what we call a soft pull. So I want everybody to understand that too. The soft pull means there's not a hard inquiry on your credit report. So if you're working with a PPL or PRG, we can pull your credit and give you an idea of what your score looks like. And what I don't want people to do is like, oh man, I got a 610, I give up.
Yes.
No,
No.
the 610, then we go to 640, we go to 660, then we go to 700. It's just the beginning. If you go to the doctor, you're not feeling well, they're going to pull your vitals,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're going to run
Yeah.
your blood, check your
Yeah.
blood pressure, everything. That's what we're doing in the financial world, right? We're running your vitals in the beginning. And part of your vitals is doing a budget and understand what your credit report looks like.
Okay. All right. And I just want to talk of just not to just lay on the credit because we got a lot to talk about this afternoon. But one of the things that I think also people don't realize is, and I've heard people go, I can afford to pay all my bills. They sit on their money like, okay, I can pay them whenever throughout the
Mm-hmm.
month as long as I pay them.
Mm-hmm.
But that hurts your credit score as well, right? Because
It depends.
if you're paying late, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm
That's
going to.
yeah.
So you're gonna make that payment, and it's usually minimum,
Mm-hmm.
and you think it's during that month that you're paying it. But if you're paying it late during that month, then that hurts your credit.
So what typically is going to happen to most people? So if I owe you $20 and my minimum payment's five, you're only charging me five because you don't really want the full 20 back, right? You want
Right.
you want to charge me
Yeah.
interest on
Yeah.
the $20
Mm-hmm.
that you borrowed me. So what happens if the payment is due on the 15th of the month and I pay on the 16th of the month? That also allows you to charge me a late fee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now all of a sudden you add $10. Let's say the late fee is $10. The standard late fee today is somewhere between $25 and $35.
Mm-hmm.
That's
We're
a
going
lot.
in this case, we're gonna say it's $10. Well, now I went from owing you $20 to $30. And then I say, you know what, man, I make that $5 minimum payment. Right. It doesn't affect my credit score until I'm actually 31 days late.
Okay.
So if I'm due October 15th, if I pay you after the 15th of November, then they have the legal right to mark me late on the credit report. But here's what a lot of people don't understand. If I don't have the $5 to pay you, I could actually call you and say, you know what, I hit a hard road this month. Can you take my payment that I owe you this month and roll it to November? Then you would have the right to say yes or no. But what you said is key. Most people won't call
No.
Yes.
and they're not going to pay.
No.
And then November comes and I still don't pay. So now I got two late fees
Yeah.
and I got a 30-day late payment on my credit report. Then my score just went straight down very fast. And it takes you a longer time to get it up. And I think the one thing I'm pretty sure LaShelle sees a lot too at PRG is we have a lot of pride as African Americans.
Yes.
So we don't want to tell somebody that I can't make that payment
Mm-hmm.
versus if I tell that creditor I can't make the payment, there's a good chance they're going to work with me.
Yeah.
But if
That's true.
I don't call them or tell them, they're just assuming I have the money.
Mm-hmm.
They're not mind readers, so we got to reach out. I always laugh. I tell people if you borrowed your best friend money and y'all talked every day, you text, whatever, and then they owe you money and you don't hear from them,
Mhm.
you upset. That's the same thing the creditors doing. They're considered your best friend when they gave you the $100,000 line of credit. They're like, oh yeah, you're my friend. But if you don't call your friend to let them know you can't make the payment, they can't help you. But I think that's one thing we see a lot. I feel like in the African American community is a lot of pride in not wanting to admit that they don't know something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's understandable. It's just because I think a lot of people are raised that everything's secret,
Yep.
you know,
Everything's
and your
family business.
finances is one of the things that is secret, you know, and until a point nobody's running around with their shirt on that talks about their income and how much they make. So you get that part,
Mhm.
but it also there's a part where you can't have pride when you're trying to make a move like this. You
Yeah.
have to have somebody you can talk to. That goes to the credit repair and advisory question
Mhm.
that I have for you, LaShelle, is to talk about credit is a major hurdle for many. How do you assist home buyers in repairing or improving their credit score? What are the most common mistakes people make, which we talked a little bit about already, and how
Mhm.
can they avoid them? And how do you help this client become mortgage ready?
Yeah. Yeah. We will sit down and look at their numbers, and again, we're pulling that credit. We're looking to see where they're at. If we see things such as collections and late payments, we'll look at their situation and put them on a plan, okay, that works for them, that's realistic. We'll look into that budget because the budget, that's where the money is. It's in the lifestyle, it's in the choices that you make when you spend. Well, in that budget, we can pull some resources from money that's already there and apply it to those challenges that we may see on the credit report. And then we'll give it a month, we'll give it 2 months, we'll revisit it. We can pull the credit score every 90 days, okay? We'll pull that credit report to see where we're at and how we're doing. And so with that credit report and with that budget, we can tweak it as we go and we can make changes as we improve. So it's not a life it's not I don't want to say lifelong thing, but it's just for a moment where you may have to make changes in your lifestyle and how you approach your spending, right?
Yeah.
And so for that little while, we allow the client. It's up to the client because it's their dream, it's their goal. So we want them to be comfortable, but at the same time, we want them to be focused on what the ultimate goal is, which is curing whatever debt that is, so we can get you to home ownership.
And with it being their goal and their home ownership and their money,
Their money, yeah.
there still comes the coaching
Hmm.
that is behind this whole conversation we're having, where we got these two organizations that are, home ownership advisor for Powderhorn, and then we also have the PPL, which is the Project for Pride and Living advisory. So, Henry, can you explain the role that financial coaching plays in helping potential home buyers prepare for home ownership, for the down payment assistance? Where it was, let's start with that question, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, so I feel like it's a holistic approach, right? So what I tell people, and I kind of brought this up earlier, if your toe hurts, you typically go to the doctor, right? If your tooth hurts, you go to the dentist. If you have a financial question, who do you typically go to? Now, I believe you should come to one of the nonprofits with unbiased financial coaching, right? I believe everybody has a partner, has a boo, but they ain't always the best people to go to, right?
Right.
So, one, I think what we're trying to do is get people to feel comfortable with who they are, right? How much money do you have? Not what somebody else has, but what do you have to work with on a day to day basis? And I think what happens a lot of times, you brought this up in the beginning, we know that we have been left out of the equity building game through home ownership.
Mhm.
The data shows it that
Mhm.
African Americans, especially foundational blacks in Minnesota, we have the worst home ownership gap in the country between white households and black households, right? So sometimes we don't have a mom or dad or grandma and grandpa that we can lean on to help us with a down payment. Typically, if you're buying a house today, you need 3.5% down if you're going FHA, maybe 3% to 5% if you're going conventional. $300,000, that's anywhere from $7,000 to $12,000 depending on the down payment program, right? The program you get approved for. Whereas there's money out there in the community to help people cover that initial 3 to 3.5 to 5% down. But as LaShelle was saying, you got to be in a position financially to get the mortgage approval.
Mm-hmm.
So if I don't allow you to get in that financial position to get mortgage approved, that money that is set aside for people to help them with down payment ends up going somewhere else.
Yeah.
So then that makes that gap even larger. And then what happens sometimes, and I'm just going to keep it real, people say, well, it's not meant for us. That's not true. It goes back to the rules of the game. If I'm asking you to have a 660 credit score to play the game, I need you to get to 660.
Mm-hmm.
Working with a financial coach at one of the local nonprofits will take you from 640 to 660. And you would be surprised, and LaShelle can probably speak to this as well, with people that have small little things
Mhm.
on their credit report that's affecting their score. I ain't paying them, man. They did me wrong. So you're letting them stop you from qualifying from a program that can get you 10,000, 5,000. We now have a new program out called First Gen, right? FirstGenDPA.org, right? That will let people get up to 10% of the sales price if you're using the community fund up to $32,000. So I'm going to repeat that again.
Okay.
I'm going to give you up to 10% of the sales price to help you buy a house up to $32,000 that's forgiven over 5 years.
Wow. So you don't even have to pay it back over 5 years.
Don't even have to pay it back.
Yep.
This Friday, I'd have been in my house 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
When I bought that house 23 years ago, I was like, I ain't going to be here 23 years.
Yeah.
I'll be here 5,
Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah.
When your kids get
Yeah.
older, your kids get older.
Yeah.
Now my daughter's in college. I'm like, why would I move? Right? She 18. Wow.
Yeah.
Now is not the time
Yeah.
to move. So I don't think that's how fast the time goes.
It
Yeah.
goes real fast.
And I
True.
think we see the same participant that they see at PRG, where a lot of it is just getting in a comfortable environment to be able to share your information with LaShelle, to be able to share your information with the financial coaches at PPO to help them get over that hump. Because I'm telling you, it's not an income issue. We have a lot of foundational black buyers that have the income to buy a house,
Mhm.
but they may not have the credit piece to
Yeah.
buy the house.
Yeah.
And
Good
then
point.
that hurts. And when you think it don't, that's
Yeah.
when you better start paying them little bills off, because where you don't want to pay it because you're mad at the creditor who gave it to you, at the end of the day, with your interest rates being higher
Mhm.
because you didn't pay them little nagging bills off.
Mhm.
You're the one that's paying,
Mhm.
not the
Mhm.
person you didn't pay that little $200-300 to. That
Mhm.
now is causing you to pay a lot
A lot
more
more.
in interest rates. So if you think of it that way, it makes sense to pay it down.
Mhm.
So what are the benefits then, Henry, of working with a down payment assistance before and after the home purchase? So it's set up and for long-term wealth building.
I think one of it could be that there's a lot of people. We talk about this with the Homeownership Opportunity Alliance, right? There's some myths out there in the world, and some people believe you need 20% down. As I just mentioned, there are programs out there that you can get into a house with 3% down and 5% down. But again, 300,000, 5% is $15,000. Some people don't have 15,000. They might have 10,000, but they're like, oh man, I don't have enough. Well, again, I just mentioned a program, First Gen, that could get you into that house. They're willing to give you up to 10%. There's other programs as well with different cities. Hennepin County has funds. City of Minneapolis had funds. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to figure out if there's down payment money out there to fit where you want to buy. But what I also don't think a lot of people understand, every bank also has to have what we call CRA, Community Reinvestment Act. They have to have their own program that might have some down payment assistance associated with, or they have special programs that you may qualify for. So we got to get over the myth, right? You want that down payment to help you get over the hump. The number one way in America to pass on wealth is home ownership.
Mm-hmm.
The second is life insurance. Two things African Americans don't have. We don't have home. We don't own at the rate we should, and a lot of times we don't have the life insurance that we should have because there's been a faux pas in the community. Well, when I'm dead and gone, does it really matter? It matters even
That's right.
more
Yeah,
because
because
now there's no
Yeah.
potential earnings for you ever again. So we need you to have the proper life insurance. We
Yes.
need you to make sure you have home ownership because again, that passes down. I'm proud to say I'm a third generation homeowner, right? I understand that a lot of people didn't grow up in that environment. So we're trying to change that narrative and really utilize the programs that were meant for you. First gen. So if that means if your mom or dad did not own a house, you qualify for this first gen program. Why would you not want to take advantage of it? And again, there are two pots of money. So let me say that. There's a $50 million pot with Minnesota Housing. There's a $100 million pot called the Community Fund with MMCDC. That $100 million pot is 10% for up to $32,000. It's forgiven over 5 years. I don't think people realize in March of 2023, it meant 5 years removed from COVID.
yeah,
Mm.
real quick.
Mm.
Right.
So you just said something about all the different pools of possible down payment assistance, and we have two different organizations here. Can I tap into all of them as a homeowner?
You
Can I go to you and to you, and then can I go to the bank and can I? I mean, it sounds like I could have money to go towards the whole amount. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's possible. You can take funds. I like to look at the funds as pots. As long as you're not dipping into the same pot again,
Mm-hmm.
you can stack those different pots on top of each other to
Okay.
get what you need,
Okay.
right?
And so you help with that.
Yep, we
Okay.
do. We will start you after our counseling session. We'll start you off with a list of different programs based on the neighborhood, based on the city, based on the county, and we also encourage our participants to speak with their lender directly. And hey, do you have a program that's specific to your lending institution that I can add to the pot? So
Okay.
yeah,
Right. And one thing I think people don't realize, too, we're all in this together. So we're all
yes,
under the Homeownership Center, Minnesota Homeownership Center's network. Right. So sometimes people are like, well, I went to PPL, so I can't go to PRG. Nope. You actually could take the first time homebuyer class with PPL and have a financial coach at PRG.
mm-hmm.
It could be reversed. We've had some buyers that have bought a PRG home that we helped with down payment assistance because they were in PPL's program. So we're all part of the network. So I do think people have to have a better understanding of that as well,
Yes.
that we're not doing this. We're together, right? We're trying to help you get the best deal that you can. And what I really want the consumer to understand, it's okay to ask the question of what can you do for me?
Right.
Yes.
That's
Right?
that's
How
the
can
main
you help?
question.
Right? How can you help me?
Yeah.
And don't feel any shame in it, right? And then one thing I add to this, I don't think people even understand what the AMI, which is average medium income, right?
Right.
Area median income. Some people are like, oh, I make $60,000. I make too much. Wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, I make $90,000. I make too much. Wrong. Right. You have to understand working with that financial coach will let you know what you do qualify for.
What you're making too much or not enough.
Right. Don't assume.
Right.
Let us tell you what you can do and can't do.
Right. And that's your job is to do that. And
Yeah.
and being that it's a nonprofit, you're there to help them and not to figure out how to swindle them out of money.
Exactly.
Correct.
And that's the other thing is I know you mentioned, LaShelle, about African American community and how we kind of, and I think you did too, Henry, is talking about how we are reluctant to, disclose our income, or, but it's also trusting,
Yes.
it's
very
been able to
much.
come to people, and I think it's one foot forward as far as coming to somebody that looks like me,
Mm-hmm.
but then it's like, but your questions that you're going to ask me are not necessarily your questions.
Yeah.
So, so we have to figure out, there was the questions that you were given to ask me from your employer, which may not look like me.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have that barrier of trust. So how do you talk about that for just a minute? How do we get past, how do we let our community know that that they can trust you?
Oh gosh. Just being in the community, being visible, and stressing that we're here to help. That buying a house, we're not taught that. We're not taught that in our community. Even growing up in school, they're showing us how to be consumers and not being savers. You go to nursery school and what do you see? The little play school, what do you call it? Cart, grocery cart,
Yeah.
right? But you don't see the bank,
Right.
right? So
Right.
I try to bring things that people understand and can relate to, from their own experience. I share a lot of my family experience, my experience as a homeowner, and the different challenges that I've had to face, so that they can see that if she can do it, you know what, I can. And she's approachable, and we kikied a little bit, and things of that nature. So it's just I try to be like a cheerleader. I'm here if you have a question. Don't think that it's a stupid question. You've never bought a house before. That's what I'm here for.
Right.
I'm here to be your resource, You may be in this process and you may get frustrated. Okay? I'm here to listen to that
Right.
too.
Right.
Get on
Right.
that keyboard on the computer, send me an email, give it to me,
Yeah.
and then let's talk about it.
Right. And help you get through your frustration.
Yes.
Or at least figure out how to navigate with it.
Exactly.
Sometimes we don't get through stuff, but we just got to
Exactly.
figure out how to navigate with it.
Yes,
Right.
very
Well, I
true.
think you
You're
said
not
something key
yourself.
too is the representation matters, right? I do think even being on this show, right? Even doing this podcast matters, right? If you get 1 to 5 people that heard this say, man, you know what, I'm tired of renting. I think I
Mhm.
can be a homeowner, right? And then they become a successful homeowner and they tell somebody at work, they tell a family member, and people see it. That's, I think, is the key, right?
Yes.
We need more representation. We know that, but we need more people to be successful.
Right.
Then it allows other people to say, man, my cousin just bought a house, or, I just saw somebody put something on Facebook, right? I think we got to do more of that. We are taught to be private,
Private.
right? So I do think it's funny when she mentioned, it being in elementary school,
Yeah.
right? Well, like that. This is something that's been going on for generation from generation to
Yes.
generation. I always ask people. I was blessed a few years ago at an event in Milwaukee, and Keith Jackson was there, and he was talking about how they're working with the youth about Sunday dining room table conversations.
Yes.
What are the conversations we're having at grandma's house or mom and
Yes.
dad's house on Sunday night? Are we talking about the way the Lynx got robbed last night?
Yeah,
Or are we
right.
talking about how to build wealth?
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I do think we don't do enough of that in the black community of saying, hey, you bought a house, how do I buy a house?
Right.
And share that information and talk about why we should have a will, why we should
Yes.
have the proper life insurance,
Mhm.
why when we live somewhere we'll rent somewhere but we won't live in that same neighborhood
Yeah, which is,
Mhm.
as a homeowner,
yeah.
right? Which
Yeah.
blows my mind. I'm gonna rent somewhere for
Yeah.
10 years,
I'm going to live there.
but I won't be a
Yeah.
homeowner in that neighborhood.
Yeah. And that makes zero sense because no matter whether you're renting or owning, you physically are living
Are
there.
living part
So,
of that community.
so you're a part of that community. So why would you choose to rent and live in a neighborhood that you would not buy in?
Correct.
That makes zero sense. But I think a lot of our homeowners have also been misguided, or
Mhm.
potential home buyers, I should say,
Yeah.
been misguided and misinformed with where they should and shouldn't live. You
Mhm.
wanna rent in North Minneapolis in the
Mm-hmm.
hood,
Mm-hmm.
but you want to move out to, you know,
That's true.
Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center, the community in the suburbs to buy a home. And so that's where that misrepresent
Misconceptions.
the whole misconception of where you should live and where you should buy, I believe, comes from, you know. And you really
Mm-hmm.
just need to determine where you want to live and rent or both, you know, and make that make sense so that you're in a community that
Yes.
you want to live in.
Yes. Very
So,
true.
so let's talk about income for just a minute. When we talk about, because that's another
That's important.
determining factor on where you want to live and where you're going to rent.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if people are thinking I can't afford that. So let's, Henry, let's talk about if someone of in the audience is struggling with limited incomes that you talked about, people looking onto our podcast this afternoon. How does PPL address these income challenges when it comes to preparing individuals to buy a home, and what resources or strategies outside of what we talked about? Is there any other things that you might recommend that they consider?
Yeah, so one thing I always tell people, and I do think is going to go back to the beginning, laying that foundation of the budget,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what do you actually make per hour, or what's your salary, and what can you afford to buy? I have a good friend of mine, Trent Bowman. The perfect home is the home that you can afford,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think sometimes people think, well, the Shell bought this $400,000 house. I need to do the same thing. Well, your budget may say you need to be at 190, and then they say, well, there's nothing out there for 190. But have you looked? Is there
Yes.
really nothing out there for 190? Right? There might actually be some out there that fits what you need. There are also other programs out there. There's land trust programs
Mm-hmm.
out there. There's Habitat that has a program out there. So there's different programs for people that might have a lower income. And I think the difference is, again, people feel like they know the answer without asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
Ask the question and somebody can
Yeah.
give you the answer. Don't assume you have the answer. But I would say this also, we talk to a lot of people like, okay, well, you're at $15 an hour and you want to buy this house. So to buy that house, you need to be at 18 or $20 an hour. Well, how do we refer you maybe to a community partner that has a training program, or they have
Mm-hmm.
employment specialists that can help you find that 18 to $20 hour job? So that's something that we are somewhat to be blessed with at PPL, is we also have an employment training department,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So we're able to refer people to that department or other community partners to get them to that $18 an hour. I have a really good friend, Anthony Taylor, from the Culture Wellness Center, that talks about human capital investment, right? Which we're investing in the human being, right? So if you're at $18 an hour, how do I help you get the house that you can afford at $18 an hour? But once you get in the house, now I get you to $22 an hour.
Right.
Well, now that payment's even easier for you,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? Because you
Yeah.
bought it at $18
Yeah.
an hour.
Yeah.
Now you're making 22,
Yeah.
which hopefully that means your budget looks even better. Your
Yes.
net worth should hopefully go up. So I do think it's a mindset, again, of telling people, how do we help you achieve the financial goals that's meant for you, right? We're going to financially empower you. And I do think that's one of the barriers, is sometimes people don't ask the question. They think they know the answer, because there are a lot of people that are paying $2,000, $2,500 a month in rent that actually could be a homeowner for that same price.
Right. Right.
Right. And you said something too. We can't be afraid to live among ourselves. Right.
No.
We cannot be afraid to live among ourselves. That affordable house you could afford might be in North Minneapolis, but we make up the community. So everybody's happy about V3. I'm so glad it's open.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's part of the community, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We can take advantage of that. We cannot be afraid to live among each other. I live not too far from here. I live by George Floyd Square. As I said, I've been in my house 23 years this Friday. I've never had a black neighbor on my block that's a homeowner
Wow.
in 23 years.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. And what is that saying? You
Right.
know?
Now, I
Yeah.
live in Powderhorn Park. People like,
Right.
oh, that's black people live with it. There are a lot of people of color that live in Powderhorn Park, but as far as homeowners,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
the same.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that V3, okay? Because look what it's doing to Northside, okay? That's an amenity. That's going to affect your property value over time. So everyone benefits.
So let's talk about V3 for
Yeah.
those that aren't familiar with that, because we kind of threw that out there. So talk about that.
It's a fitness center,
Okay.
brand new facility.
Okay.
They have a pool.
Mm-hmm.
They have basketball courts and Nautilus machines and lifting weights and all that kind of stuff. They have programs after school, I believe, also there
Right.
at the facility.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful
Right.
facility. And when I was driving by, because I take the long way to work because I don't like to drive on the freeway. And I didn't know what was going there, and I saw the V3. So as soon as I got
Yeah.
home, I pulled it up on Google. I was like, oh my gosh, it's a fitness center. And the first thing I thought of, what it's going to do to property values in the North Side. Everybody wins with that.
Right.
Well, and I think that too And I think other cultures see the
Mhm.
value
The
in that. I
value
don't
in
know
that.
that
Say
we
that, say
do.
that again.
I think other cultures see the value in that, and we don't.
Mhm.
And so there's this whole other conversation we need to have, which talks
Yes.
about redlining. So what's happening is we're building things in this community that our community is running from,
Running from.
and
Yes.
other communities
Yes.
are running too.
Mhm.
Correct.
And so they're going to have these valuable things that we're not going to have. So that's another reason why you got to be able to live amongst your own people, and be okay with that. I mean, I understand, concerns if there's a lot of violence and crime. I get that part. But that doesn't mean that we can't, still live amongst each other. And that's the concern that I think we want to focus in on having. So the current market, let's talk about that, because as of October of 2024, the average interest rates for a 30-year fixed mortgage in Minnesota is around 6.77%, if I'm not mistaken. So rates may vary depending on credit scores and loan types, but what advice would you give to first-time homebuyers on navigating today's housing market? Because really kind of thinking about, should I buy a home now or should I wait? This whole 6.77. I mean, what was the low?
It was like
3
two,
years,
two and a
6 years
half,
ago.
3%.
And
Yeah.
how
Right.
soon did that jump up? And is there now, if I'm thinking about that, should I worry about that and wait and see that it goes down? Or so
Mhm.
what kind of advice are you giving with the people when you're looking at that?
The advice that I give to people is you're ready when you're ready. The rates are going to be what they are. There's no way that we can predetermine what they are, and of course that should not prevent you from buying. You're ready when you're ready. I would just keep an eye on what's going on in the news, in the market. Stay in touch with your homeownership advisor, right? And just keep your eyes open and just be open. Just be open.
Yeah, I'll double down on that too. I think that the time is when you're ready.
Yeah.
I don't think we should buy because of rates.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say it twice. If you're not paying your mortgage, you're paying somebody else's mortgage. So again, if you're not paying your mortgage, that means you're paying your landlord's mortgage, right? So I think whenever you're financially ready to buy, you should buy. This is why I always tell participants we work with you. If you can buy at 6.77, what happens when rates go down to 4?
Yeah.
And you're in that same property, and if you were to refinance, that means your payment just went down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my recommendation would be that you continue to pay the same payment you were paying at 6.77. That way, you get your house paid off faster,
Yeah.
right? We want them to apply more to their principal balance. You will sign a 30-year loan. You sign a 30-year note, promissory note. Doesn't mean you have to pay it off in 30 years. You can pay it off in 15. You can pay it off in 20, 25, whatever, right? But I do think the difference is society says don't buy now because rates are high. Okay, but what if rates don't go down for another 5 years down to 4%? And let's be honest, we kind of went down to that low because we had a crisis,
Yeah.
right? They just didn't naturally go down. There was kind of a crisis, right? So I do think the one thing I tell people is when you're ready, you should buy. We have another thing called with the Homeownership Opportunity Alliance, get ready, be ready. You should
Yes.
always be ready to buy a house,
Yeah, I like that.
right?
Get ready to be ready.
Right. And
Okay.
what happened to a lot of people when rates were 4%, they weren't ready,
Right.
right? But if they were ready at that time, they could have bought at that 4%. So I truly believe you should always be ready to buy a house. And when you see that house that fits what you're looking for, you should be able to jump on it and go.
Yeah.
So with that said, so when is a good time to work with people that you see them being ready?
Oh yeah, we work with people who are ready, and I have people in my pipeline now who I've been working with for over a year. It's just us checking in every few months with them to pull a credit, see how we're doing. Do we need to make plans, and do we need to make changes in the route that we're taking to get to our ultimate destination? So whenever they're ready to come and have that discussion, we're here.
Right. And so then, but once they come,
Mhm.
how long? Like, say I just walk in the door,
Mhm.
and I don't know, I just want to buy a house. I just happen to hear about this podcast, and now I find one of your organizations, and I'm there. How then? But I have no idea. I don't know where my credit score is. I don't know what house I'm looking for. I just got an idea. I just heard Henry talk about $18 an hour. So now I'm motivated to buy a house because I can afford it at $18 an hour.
Mhm.
When then would that homeowner be? What time frame would you think about? getting they probably don't have good credit. Not necessarily that they do, but just to say your credit's kind of mediocre. You got some obstacles. What kind of time frame should we have people expect so they don't get too anxious and want to move in by the end of this year?
That's a good question. Um, I I share with clients, this is up to you. This is your journey. Okay. So this program is going to move as quickly as you move,
Mhm.
right? If we find that there's challenges with the income, then we'll set up a plan to get you there. If there's issue with the credit report, will it let's talk about, will it take us 3 months to get the credit up to where it should be, where we can get you mortgage approved, or it may take a little longer than that. So it's really up to the client on how
Yeah.
quickly they want to move towards on their journey towards home ownership.
So I would double down on that, and I think people should look at this meeting with a financial coach at a nonprofit as it's you excavating your financial world,
Yeah.
right? You're excavating, and now you're going to start to build the foundation. You're trying to build a solid foundation. I think what happens to a lot of African Americans is they see the house they like, but they
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what their financial situation
Mhm.
is. So I tell people the earlier you can get in, the better, because then
Mm-hmm.
you can have a real idea of what your income looks like, your credit looks like, and then build on that, right? I think a lot of people go to the bank first. I'm going to say this: I have love for all my banking partners,
Right.
but you should probably come to the nonprofit first because a bank, most people in real estate agent, loan officers are paid commission,
Mhm.
right? So if you ain't ready today, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Come
Yeah.
back and see me when you're
Right.
ready,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas our job as the nonprofits is to get you ready. So I'm gonna say to get ready, be ready,
Hmm.
right? So we're gonna get you ready. So when you then go see a loan officer, you walk in there chest up, head
Mm-hmm.
held high.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know you're
Right.
gonna get approved.
Right.
Now it's like who wants my business, right?
Yeah.
So you may go to bank A, you may go to bank B, you may go over to bank G, but now they're vying for your business,
That's
and
right.
that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to set people up to be successful when they walk in that door. They know they got all the pieces to the puzzle box and that somebody's going to give them a mortgage and they're going to be a homeowner.
Nice. And so that was perfect. That was perfect because I was getting ready to segue into where do you start first, and you
Yeah.
went right into it. So it's starting first with your home advisors, and then you move from wherever they're kind of recommending you move
Yeah.
to. And I think the other thing that I keep hearing too is that we don't need to come in knowing it all.
No.
We need to come in and be humble and listen and take advice
Mm-hmm.
and of course, if you just don't feel that you're getting the best advice, then you can go to another home ownership program. But I think if you're looking at people that are sincere about, they're not making any commission off of you,
Yeah.
and their job is just to make it to help you spend that money that's there for you.
Yes.
So don't go somewhere else. Let's make sure you get it. So listening to your home advisor is an important thing
It's
in
important.
order to get the most out of the relationship. And then you mentioned earlier too, LaShelle, as far as keeping an eye on the news. Well, we don't want people to feel over inundated with
Mm-hmm.
worrying about keeping up with stuff. They just
Mm-hmm.
need to call you,
Yeah.
right? Let's
Yeah.
just don't worry about, because we want to simplify this
Yeah.
process. So
Yeah.
you might not even watch the news. Be like, oh, now they telling me to watch the news. I want I want to make sure that that
Right.
doesn't the last thing they heard.
Well, you call us and we'll help you watch news or watch news with you. Right.
Yeah. There you go. So we want to make sure you don't have to do no homework, right?
Of
They can
course.
just walk in, and then you'll keep them up to date.
Yeah.
Oh,
Both of
yeah.
you will
Hmm.
Yeah.
keep. If they want to call you every day, can they call you every day?
They can.
They can. So again, I think the thing that's changed is you have the ability to text with somebody, you have the ability to email somebody,
Yeah.
you have the ability to talk to them over the phone. And I go back to what LaShelle said: we don't push you, we
Yeah.
work
That's
with
right.
you,
Yeah.
right? So there are some people that say, "Hey, I got to be in. I got my lease is up in June of next year. I need to be ready by
Mm-hmm.
March." Yep,
Okay.
let's put together a plan. You
Nice.
got some people that say, you know what, my lease is up next October. Okay, let's still have you come in now, put together a plan. I'm proud to say one of the longest clients I ever worked with was 10 years,
Mm.
right? And she just didn't want to jump off the cliff. She was
Yeah.
afraid that she jumped off the cliff, her parachute wasn't going to open.
Right.
But now when she jumped and she saw that parachute open and she has that house, she's been sending people left and right because she
Yeah.
understands like, hey, I was prepared.
Yeah.
When I
Yep.
jumped,
Yeah.
that parachute
Was
opened.
ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah.
And it is all about the preparedness
Yeah.
because in anything, I mean, even if
Mm-hmm.
you go and rent somewhere and you can't really afford that rent and you're not
Mm-hmm.
prepared to pay it, The landlord wants his rent at the beginning. He don't care if you don't eat.
That's right.
That's not his
right.
problem.
That's right.
If you
That's
didn't
right.
figure out whether you could afford his rent that you now are paying for his mortgage instead of your own, the concern is not on whether or not you can eat. So
Yep.
it is about being prepared. So, let's talk a little bit too about the disparities. We know that communities of color, especially in Minnesota, have faced significant disparities in homeownership rates. We talked about rates just a minute ago, but what specific actions can be taken to close this gap and ensure that more families of color can achieve home ownership? So, is there anything within your work environment that you feel can help to close that gap? Is it just education, or is it working with more lenders? Is there any way you feel that your with your work? Because I know sometimes it's out of your purview. You can't. There's nothing. Your work helps people to
To
achieve
get
that
there.
that gap.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of it is just our having this conversation right now and just being open to have these discussions with our families, with our mom and dads, with our nieces and nephews, and just being open and willing to bring that discussion to the table. I When I was growing up, I watched my parents have these kind of discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's not happening like it used to because all my aunts and uncles were homeowners. So this didn't used to be the case. So we've stopped talking about those things. We need to come back to the dinner table and start having those conversations. And if there's no one around you where you feel that you can open up and have that discussion with, there's a homeownership advisor somewhere that you can reach out to and have the discussion with.
That's a very simple thing, especially if they're not feeling intimidated to
Yeah.
come to you.
Yeah.
We just need to maybe talk more to our youth about, especially if you don't come from a generation of homeowners. It's hard to have a parent or a grandparent sitting at the table talking to you
Yeah.
about something that they didn't do.
Exactly.
And that's that one part of the gap of the barrier that we try to figure out how to have these conversations like we're having right now. And Tracy's keeping it real to really talk about how can we get our community to have these discussions because we got to break it. We got to break people not being homeowners. We're talking about passing down generational wealth. And maybe you wonder how that is, but if somebody gives you a home that's paid for and it's $300,000 home or $200,000 home, that essentially is money in the bank.
Yes,
But at the same time, you don't want to run to the bank and cash it in because then you just gave away the generational wealth and now you're back to square one. So I think people also need to understand that whole component when you're talking about refinancing, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But we kind of touched on it just briefly when we said when the mortgage rates are at one level, you can always refinance. But refinancing means you're starting all over again on your loan. So that's a whole nother conversation that people want to consider before they make that move. Remember the time when the interest rates
Oh yeah.
were rock bottom and
Yeah.
people ran out there and refinanced
Over and over again.
Yeah, I think we
then
have to
people
be.
lost their homes as a result of it.
So I do think what Lachey said. I think and what you're just saying. I think the conversations have to happen, right?
Yeah.
And I go back to because we had Sunday dinners when I was growing up, right? I think we need to figure out how to get people back in front of the dinner table. No cell phones, no TV,
Yes.
just having conversations. But I do agree. I think part of the problem is we're really fast with things today, right? We want everything to move really fast, and I think just because you're at 6.5 and rates go to 5 doesn't mean you have to refi, right? Because you hit some, you may not have to refi, but even get into the house. I'm gonna say this again. It's firstgendpa.org, right? They are willing to help you get 10% of the sales price up to $32,000. We got to figure out how to get people to take advantage of the programs that are here to get them into the house. Because what happens is I see people say, "Well, there's no programs out there for us, right? There's nothing to help me buy a house." There is record number of programs out there right now today to help you buy a house. But the other conversation is we have to be real with each other as friends and family, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And when somebody ain't doing right,
Right.
you ain't doing right. Let's
Yeah.
let's stop making excuses.
Mhm.
Have you fixed your credit?
Yeah.
Have you got the job you really want to get? And have you went and listened to this podcast to learn about how to go get the money and work with a PRG or PPL? Because I think we've done that for a long time. And what's happening, the data is showing that the homeownership gap is not as big in other BIPOC communities.
No, other than ours.
Right.
Right.
And there's a reason a little bit for that, but part of it is because mom and dad didn't own a house and grandma and grandpa didn't own a house. We are not passing on generational wealth.
Right.
We're not passing on that $300,000 house, but we might be passing on a car payment. We might be passing on some debt. Again, I know why people do it, but one thing I don't like GoFundMe pages.
No, I can't.
Right?
I can't deal with them. I think the GoFundMe should never happen because you should prepare to take insurance out.
Correct.
We shouldn't be stressing the community on your responsibility or lack of.
There you go.
So I understand that. They may not like me saying that, but I'm keeping it real.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
That's what I just say, right?
yeah.
So we got people doing GoFundMe pages, and instead of like, we know we're all going to leave this earth at some point, right? My daughter's 18 years old, freshman in college, and I tell her, if something happens to daddy and you mess my money up, I will get you from the grave. Right? I'm going to get you. Because you're going to get some good money.
Yeah.
Don't mess it up. But the thing is, we have to have that conversation too before she went to college. They're going to give you a lot of credit card offers. Rip them up.
Yeah.
Right? Don't get yourself in trouble as a freshman in college. And the fact you're not in Minnesota, you're in Durham, North Carolina. Right? So those are conversations we have to have. We have a lot of young kids we work with, 18 years old. The first thing they want to do is go buy a car.
Right.
Now, you go buy a car, but are you buying a $3,000 car or a $30,000 car? I'm okay if you're buying a car you can afford that is going to be your starter car, right? Something you don't need to show and be flashy. And what I always joke about with people that when I used to coach, you're paid $500 for a car that sits in the parking lot all day. Because you driving to work, it sits in your parking lot at work, and then you drive back home typically. And you said this earlier. Now, most weekends are spent, if you have kids, you're at some type of sporting event on Saturday and Sunday. So once again, it's sitting in the parking lot.
Yeah, looking good, but hey, you're paying you're paying a car payment that you probably can't halfway afford.
Right.
That you could have done something more economical with that money and still been able to get around with a car that got you the spot. And again, I think it's us talking, amongst our community. So so if I'm right now listening and I don't have the knowledge of home ownership, but I know that my girlfriend's kids are 19 and they're talking about moving out, it's a good time for me to have this conversation to say, listen to Tracy's Keeping It Real. At least you can help them to guide them, because at least some things, if we don't know, I find that me owning and running a business, the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, there are things that I actually don't know. Even though it's a newspaper and I should know a lot of things, there are a lot of things I do know, but what I don't know, I'm looking for resources. And I think our community needs to look for resources like this conversation to direct your friend, to direct their kid. And then there's plenty of help there once they get there. And I think that's, what we want our listeners and our viewers this afternoon or when they see this show and hear it, is to be able to know there is help. And there's help that will walk them through the whole process. And I like hearing the fact that if you're not making enough money, there's even a job resource out there that'll help you to get ready for a better paying job. But you got to know that these opportunities exist. So you want to be able to reach out to PPL or PRG and know that they're out there, and then have someone like LaShelle or Henry walk you through, or other people in your organization walk you through that program, and help you to become a steady, reliable, a person that can be proud of having their own home. Get out of these apartments. Let the landlord figure out another way to pay his mortgage.
Right.
When I look at people that've been in an apartment, I've been here for 15 years. What?
Yeah.
Right.
I guess it makes sense if you're disabled and you're in a safe environment and you're in an apartment complex that kind of looks over you, but not just in everyday
life.
Yeah. So, and I don't think people just don't think about becoming a homeowner. And again, I know that just buying a house and your mortgage is less than your rent is one thing. You still got water, lights, gas. You still got other things to take into consideration. But at the end of the day, some of that, you still have money to do that if you're paying less on your mortgage than you were on your rent. So that can balance out what you're doing, and you're putting money towards your future, which is what we're talking about this afternoon. building homeowners wealth, building wealth for our community, building wealth for our families, and then just giving us a nice, warm environment that we feel good about living in. So is there any parting advice that you want to give my listeners today to say, if you don't do nothing else, do this?
Uh, attend a home stretch workshop. It's free. Yes, it's 8 hours, but it's free information. You're going to be in class with people who are in different stages of the home buying process. You're going to learn from them. You're going to learn from the people that come and volunteer their time during the class to teach. We have loan officers, we have realtors that all participate on that day. So you're going to learn what these different people do in the home buying process. So it's a great place to start. Or if you just want to schedule an appointment with a homeownership advisor, such as myself or Henry, do that.
Okay.
We're here for you.
Now tell me, here I go back to keeping it real now. 8 hours. That's a long time. So I'm just saying, I mean, is there weekends or evenings?
Yes.
Okay. So we can make it work within our schedule.
Could I ask you this? Is
Yes.
8 hours a long time to get up to $32,000?
Now for me, yes. No, I'm still no, and
Right.
absolutely no, and we need to look at it that way.
Yes.
But I also have to keep it real and
Yes,
realize that
indeed.
people, when you hear 8 hours, you're like, oh my God, I'm not going to be doing that. But at the same time, to your point, is it worth that? You know, and so I also think definitely it's worth it. But the question is, can we fit it into our schedule? Because maybe I can't come up with a mental health day today. I use that. I use that already on my job.
So we do it on the weekends,
Okay.
typically on Saturdays.
Okay.
If you're a part of the network, PRG and PPL are sponsored by NARAB, which is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. It's a Black affinity group for real estate professionals in the state. So our workshops have no cost. It is a sacrifice. We do feed you at PPL.
We'll feed you too.
Okay.
So I think I do. What I told
Do we have
people is,
daycare?
we do not. I'm not gonna. We do not allow
Okay.
kids.
Okay.
Now, if you have a newborn, we're not gonna turn you away,
Right.
right? But if it's a child that can probably hopefully be a grandma, grandpa, or a friend for those 8 hours. But I would say this one thing LaShelle brought up. It's also a good chance to meet other real estate professionals that look like you, but also have that same passion that we have,
Right.
that are going to make sure you get the right deal.
Right.
Yes.
So we're not going to have a crisis in 3 years from now that you might have bought the wrong house and might have got the wrong loan product. You got the wrong loan product. They're there because they're volunteering, because they want to be there to make sure that your journey on homeownership is successful.
And see, and that is very important, because
Very
meeting the two of you is great, but then what's next? You guys are just gonna throw me out to the wolves?
Oh,
So knowing that you're gonna hand them off to somebody else that's gonna take the same kind of care and interest in their home ownership process and buying is going to be as wonderful as the experience that they've had listening to you two this afternoon. So I think that we're on a good path to becoming homeowners. It's, again, the conversation needs to be, have it at home, have it with your friends. Make sure that if you don't have anybody to have it with, how are they going to reach you? How just quickly tell them, and I know we'll give some information after the show, but how can they reach you, LaShelle?
Yeah, our website is www.prginc.org.
Okay, and
Henry Rucker at PPL, Project for Pride and Living, and I'm going to give you the phone number you can call, 612-455-5100, 612-455-5100. But I also say you can also look at the Minnesota Homeownership Center, hocmn.org, and all the providers are also going to be on there, and there's a list of the workshops that are coming up.
So say that again about the homeownership.
hocmn.org. That's the Homeownership Center Minnesota. That's who our network, basically they run the network that we're all part of.
Perfect. And they've put it together to make sure that we have a community of home ownerships, and they put it together because they wanted to have people that cared about making sure that this home ownership gap is closing.
Yes.
So I want to thank Henry Rucker today, the Associate Director of Home Ownership and Financial Coaching for the Project for Pride in Living, and LaShelle Smith, the Home Ownership Advisor for Powderhorn Resident Group, which is also known as PRG. Want to thank the two of you for coming out and spending the afternoon with me, and for just spending the afternoon with my listeners and my viewers to help educate them further. And until next time, remember, Tracey is always keeping it real. So home ownership is important to me. It should be important to you. Until next time, remember, make sure people like me, follow me, And check me out next time on Tracy's Keeping It Real.